and welcome to episode 26 of our unofficial SAP on Azure video podcast. Today we have January 28th, and together with Robert and Goran, we're here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So last week, there were quite a lot of news in the SAP and Microsoft context. First of all, there was this extending the partnership, or the announcement about extending the partnership between SAP and Microsoft. And then there was obviously the SAP RISE event. So as always, we will take a first quick look at these news items. But then I have the very great pleasure to introduce you to Hans Reutter, who will take us on a journey of how Microsoft is running SAP. So I'm really looking forward to that one. But again, before we get there, let's quickly take a look at some of the things that were announced. The first one was actually end of last week when SAP and Microsoft announced an extension of their partnership, of our partnership. And we talked there about integrating teams, but also leveraging Azure in more ways, talking about integrating or simplifying the whole deployment of SAP systems on Azure, helping with the migration, working on eventing and stuff like that. So quite a lot of topics. And the thing why I don't want to spend too much today here is that probably next week in our podcast, we'll have someone from the core team, I would say, that worked really with this whole partnership with us on the podcast. So she will hopefully be able to help us get a much better picture of what's actually part of this partnership, this renewed partnership, I would say. If you cannot wait till then I think Christian Lechner in his myNewsWrap, he had a special episode actually almost immediately after the announcement. So obviously you can listen and watch him summarize his side of the equation, or looking at from his perspective what Embrace 2.0, as he called it, has in store. But he also collected quite a lot of links that I think can be really interesting to get a good overview of what actually happened. So with this, let's put this aside. Again, next week, we'll definitely focus on this much more. So let's take a look at the other thing, the RISE with SAP event. I knew some things of this event up front, obviously. I mean, Satya Nadella was one of the key participants, I would say, or the key guests of this event. But there was also a lot of other announcements. Christian Klein, I think he had a very good intro session there where he talked about RISE with SAP, where he introduced the concept. And I have to admit that I struggled a little to understand what exactly RISE with SAP is. And I mean, in the meantime, I did a lot of reading, and two things that really helped me get a better understanding of what RISE with SAP is are these blogs by Diginomica. So Dan Hullett wrote a very extensive blog where he talks about what RISE is. So it's not Hack 2.0. And yeah, he outlines basically what RISE with SAP is. And in the end, I mean, it's a completely new offering. It's a bundling of certain services. So there's infrastructure in there. There's obviously the product there. There's a transformation in there. The business technology platform is embedded, but also then SaaS services. Ariba is part of this bundling. So this blog really outlines this in a pretty good way from my point of view. He also quotes the different user groups, so the UK user group, the DSAC user group, he also shed some light from a partner perspective, from a development perspective. So I think this is fairly good and extensive explanation of what RISE with SAP really is. If you want to have it in a little more condensed way, then there's this blog, or this RISE with SAP FAQ by John Appleby, who outlines this really in a nice way. Really, so what's the history? What's the problem today? This adoption, the digital innovation with S4, that a lot of customers just make a migration to S4 and that's it. They don't really leverage the benefits of a digital transformation that can come with S4HANA. So this is also a really nice FAQ that really explains how what the benefits of RISE with SAP are actually available. So if you want to take a close look, I can definitely recommend these two blogs. There's one other blog from Jürgen Müller, who talks more from a development angle, introducing or talking about why it's so important to have the business technology platform. Also talking about sunsetting the term SAP Cloud Platforms are now really focusing on the business technology platform. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other renaming now. So the SAP Cloud Platform integration services are renamed to integration services or SAP integration services or something like that. He talks a little about new packages or new scenarios, how they work together as part of the business technology platform now, how they belong together with the SAP Analytics Cloud, with the other SaaS offerings there. So it's a good blog that talks about how mainly the business technology platform obviously takes a very, very important role in the new way forward, so to say. So also definitely a very interesting blog to look into. Then one last thing that I had just released this morning, Christian Lechner again, he wrote a nice blog about integrating Office with SAP. And those of you who know me, I'm a huge fan of this Office integration. I mean, starting from a simple workflow that you can approve and reject in Outlook to obviously
we know it, Holger. We know.
Thank you. That's good. So my
we
job
noticed,
here is done.
right?
It's not first time that you mentioned that, by the way. So,
no.
You know, so we know it.
Only once in each session. Only once.
Okay, I get your point.
Yeah.
I'll be a little more relaxed next time. No, but it's really nice. I mean, this blog is really nice because he's really putting this into a business content and context, and he really outlines. Look, this is how the process was before, talking about different manual steps that are required, jumping between systems and stuff like that. And then he turns everything around and says, look, how does it look like if we integrate into Teams, if we are using Excel, if we are using Outlook, and really working with the data in these tools. So helping the end user to work from the tools that are currently living in Excel, in Outlook, in Teams, and whatever. And then from there, interacting with SAP data. Yeah. So I think this is definitely a very interesting blog.
Yeah, because for many users, the word rotates around the Office, around the Teams, you know, so these kind of integration are absolutely just on a mouse click away.
Exactly.
Yeah. One question. So do you think that, Holger, that SAP now finally opening the borders? Not, you know, SAP is traditionally always talking about integration, but it's always in-house integration. Yeah. So do you think that they finally opened that and they are really now talking about integration, which means, okay, I don't care if my data are going somewhere else because still I'm the leader of the business data, or you think it's not yet there?
I don't know, to be very honest.
Okay.
From my point of view, I mean, if you look at the API Business Hub, they are exposing more and more data. They are opening up, and it is much easier now to do exactly these scenarios that we see here. So really getting the data in Office or something like that. Whether it's also as easy from a licensing perspective and from a compliance perspective when working with SAP, time will tell. I think I mean, look at Microsoft again. I still very much remember when I was at SAP that Microsoft was pushing for, look, you have to use Outlook. Outlook is the UI that you need to work, or don't do anything else. And in the meantime, more or less, Microsoft doesn't care.
Everybody's using Outlook.
No, yeah, maybe that's the case, but I think even more importantly, as long as
I get it.
are using APIs, as long as I'm using the Microsoft Graph to access my Outlook. Microsoft more or less doesn't care whether you're using the Outlook UI or you're using just an API to connect to my services. And I think SAP should do it the very same. They should not care if I'm using a Fiori user interface or if I'm using Outlook, as long as I am accessing the SAP system and not Salesforce or something else. So let's see how this will evolve.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think so. All this Office integrations obviously is very important, and it's playing a very important role when it comes to also running your SAP systems on Azure. And one other thing, whenever I started to work at Microsoft and I talked to customers about the benefits of running SAP on Azure, one of the key highlights always was that we could say, look at Microsoft IT. Microsoft IT is also running SAP on Azure. That means whatever you customers will go through, Microsoft is also going through this. And so very early when I joined Microsoft, I learned from Hans. I watched a few of his presentations when he was talking to customers, and I was always blown away. So I'm super, honestly, I'm really happy that we have the honor of having Hans here in our in our podcast. So with this, Hans, maybe I would like to hand it over to you, and maybe you can introduce yourself, and then I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Well, thanks, Holger. First of all, thanks for the invite. It's awesome to be here. I'm a huge fan of the podcast. I watch it every Saturday morning, and you always see me commenting on this. I think there's so much information in there. I think it's great. I use it to stay up to date on a lot of things as far as SAP on Azure goes. So it's great. And yes, I do think the fact that Microsoft runs their own SAP installation, and it's a large installation, I'll show you that in a moment, on their own cloud, that's a huge benefit to us, right? We have been running SAP for 25 years. It went live in 1996. It's been running on Azure, 100% on Azure for 3 years now. And I think it's great. We learn a lot internally. We're able to give feedback to the product group. I think it's one of those well-known secrets that we interact very closely with the product group, and then also with SAP IT, right? Because as you know, SAP is running their own footprint on Azure as well. So I'm happy to give an update. We do this frequently. There's a whole team behind this. We have an in-house basis team. There's an architecture team, and we frequently present these slides. And I think it's great. We always keep them up to date. And here is the latest and greatest. I hope you can see the slide. The idea was
yes. Oh, yeah. Now it's there. Okay.
Awesome. The idea was to do a quick intro. What we have as far as SAP products at Microsoft, how we migrated them to the cloud, and the lessons learned, the best practices, how we optimize cost, which is important for us. But then also, that's just the first step. We're also in the middle of our S/4HANA journey. Like so many customers, we have both the old NetWeaver and new S4 systems, and I'll give you an update on that as well. And please, if you have any questions in the meantime, just chime in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So going to Azure, or moving from on-premise to Azure, was part of a bigger effort to modernize our SAP system. It was part of a overall digital transformation. And really, the goal was to, reduce some of our custom functionality that we've created over the years. I said a moment ago, we have about 25 years of SAP at Microsoft, which is great. But, no surprise, there's been some customizations along the way. And also, 25 years ago, some of the functionality didn't exist. So our goal is to get to standard, to reduce customizations, and wherever possible, let's use some of the SAP SaaS services, for example, Ariba, IBP, SuccessFactors, Concur, and so on. And so that was a huge push over the last few years, and you'll see that in a moment, what we use today. There was also a goal to stop the silos between the different IT groups. We used to have a development team, a tester team that was separate, and then a separate support team. And again, that wasn't really beneficial for quality and kind of a for modern way to create business functionality. We smushed all these teams together into one DevOps engineering team. So today, the engineer who envisions, designs the functionality together with our architecture partners and program management partners, he or she will then implement the functionality, configuration, ABAP, will test it, and then operate it in production as well. So, there's this instant feedback loop on, business customers experiencing issues occasionally, and then we can directly learn out of this in our lifecycle reviews and funnel that back into the development cycle. And so that has been absolutely amazing. I can tell you, for example, in my team, we're reducing production support tickets year over year by at least 30% because this DevOps loop feeds, feedback back into the development process. We're also a lot more agile. We used to run these big quarterly releases 4 times a year. If you missed the boat on that, you had to wait for another 3 months. Of course, in a modern consumer-driven world, that is, that's just not good enough anymore. So these days, about roughly two-thirds of our functionality get released daily, weekly, monthly, and then yes, we still have those quarterly releases for like a big enhancement pack upgrade or something like that, but a lot more agile. And this is also something where Azure has really helped us, because if you want to create a quick little MVP system or a proof of concept system in Azure, that takes hours, right? The hardware is there automatically. You can just say, hey, I need, a database, some app servers, and you can quickly build a system. And on premise, that would have been very challenging. So, that whole push for agility. Another thing that we're doing is we're focusing much more on tangible, measurable business outcomes. And that also includes a lot of metrics, a lot of monitoring and telemetry, and then highlighting those in dashboards or in what we call operational key results, OKRs. And that's where Azure Monitor helps us. And if you go out, and maybe we can put a link in the description, there are some great blog posts and articles about how we're using Azure Monitor internally. And this is, I think, an area where internal Microsoft IT, or CSE as it's called, has really been helpful funneling feedback and even doing some of our own development and making that available. And this is all fully available to our business partners. And ultimately, the goal is to see system metrics, funnel up into business process metrics, where you can kind of end-to-end look at the business process. When your sales order was created, when it posted, when it, got delivered, when it was invoiced, and all of that. And you can see trends that help you prevent incidents. So, for example, if you see, batch job runtimes or transaction runtimes slowly creep up, hey, it's perfect opportunity to kind of forecast when will it hit a critical threshold, and should we do something right now to prevent that incident from happening. And we do a lot of this on Azure Data Lake, where we dump all the data into a big database. And this is where machine learning and AI, I think, open a lot of possibilities as well. Is there anything you can do in a predictive way to see patterns before they really, have customer impact? So this is great for us. And really, for us, moving from on-premise to Azure was the enabler for a lot of these things. It wasn't, it's not a direct must-do before you can do anything else, but it really allowed us to move faster and just kind of lower the bar of entry for a lot of these things. Like machine learning, AI, you don't need to have, you don't need to program that yourself. Just use some existing functionality in Azure, and that's what we did. So that was the main push, modernizing our SAP footprint. And I'll show you what the footprint is, first from a business view, and then from a kind of SAP product and application point of view. So on the left, you see our different main business streams. And then these boxes, these green boxes, are our SAP products in Azure for the last 3 years. And then also to the right here, you're seeing some of these SaaS services that we're using, Ariba, IBP, Concur. And as you can see, we have lots of different
Everything.
yeah, almost everything. Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
You name it, they have it. You name it, they have it, right?
True. You're also seeing some S4 systems here, right? Or some BW4 systems. So I'll show you, I'll move to the next slide and I'll show you more of the traditional SAP overview where you see modules and products. Everything that you see in blue is the classic NetWeaver stack. This runs on Windows and SQL Server. Everything is in Azure. Everything that you see in green here to the right, those are the SAP SaaS services. And then everything you see in orange are HANA-based systems. And they run with the database on SUSE Linux and with the application servers on Windows. And again, everything is 100% in Azure. And if you look closely, you'll see that some systems, for example, master data governance right here, exist in an S4 world, but then we also have a master data governance system in NetWeaver. And so you can see we're right in the middle of migrating from our, can I say, legacy NetWeaver stack to the S4 footprint. And I have a few more slides there in a few minutes. And, this will go on for a bit longer, and eventually all these NetWeaver systems will slowly sunset and go into archival mode or read-only mode, and we'll be in the new S4 world.
Yeah, I mean, just like any other customer, right? I mean,
that's
you're
right.
Really going through the whole migration transition phase. I see central finance, S4HANA, central finance. I think that's also something that a lot of customers start with, obviously, when they do S4. So yeah, right. Really like any other customer.
For us, I think it was also important to get to Azure first, because once you're in a very scalable, very agile cloud environment, it's easier to do things like migrating from NetWeaver to HANA. Like I said, these sandboxes, proof of concept systems. We didn't want to do this on premise and having to buy special HANA hardware or things that we knew would be, unused in a short time down the road. So going to Azure first, and then doing our NetWeaver to HANA migration, I think, was key. Maybe one other word to our HANA migration. So like I said, we've been doing this for 25 years. Our business model has really changed. 25 years ago, we had, boxes on shelves. You would buy the brand new Windows 95 or something like that. And we had, pre-installed Windows 95 on OEM PCs. These days, our business model is completely different. It's more like a cell phone type invoice. You have flat fees, you have usage fees, and those kind of things. So naturally, I think a lot of the business processes behind that, especially also in finance, have changed a lot to be able to do more granular cost and profit attribution and things like that. And so we're taking this opportunity to do a greenfield implementation, maybe greenfield with a few little brown spots, where we said, we have our existing big ERP system, we're building greenfield in parallel, and then pull functionality over. Upgrading our big ECC system directly to HANA wouldn't really allow us to re-engineer our business processes. And then, of course, you also would have that problem of a quite extended downtime for a system that size, and that would be impossible to really absorb in our business environment. So parallel, greenfield, in some cases, brown spots, and really using the opportunity to re-engineer business processes, get more modern, and like I said in the very beginning, get more to standard and take advantage of those new capabilities.
And for me, it's interesting.
Sorry,
on your HANA system, you mentioned you are still using a Windows there on the application layer quite intensively, and because it's offers a lot of benefits there and good integration on that side, right? Yeah.
And a lot of our internal tooling that the basis team, scripts and things like that over the years, it works, right? Why change it?
Yeah,
and of course,
right.
we're now doing the same thing for SUSE Linux.
So you mentioned this during the migration in S/4HANA direction, that you somehow try to optimize business processes, improve introduce new one, and so on. How that reflect to infrastructure? Did you also take a chance to somehow optimize your future infrastructure? For example, that you have more application server, less application servers.
That's a great question. I'm gonna say I'll answer that in maybe like 4 or 5 slides. But you're absolutely right. This is a perfect opportunity to look at, should you take this one big ERP system and move it to one big HANA system, or maybe for agility reasons, split it up and go a bit more granular, and that's what we did. So I'll cover that in a few slides.
But Hans, you talked about the big ERP system. Can you share some numbers on the ERP system?
Awesome. You must have seen the slide deck before. So that's a good question. It's a massive system. I mean, like I said, this runs on NetWeaver and SQL on Azure. This is a 65 terabyte database. Now we compress it. We're taking advantage of SQL compression, but still, I mean, 24 terabyte in a compressed state is massive. This is 140,000 users. Named users are a little lower because we do use a lot of APIs, a lot of BAPIs, the SAP Business APIs. But it's a massive system, billions of transactions every year, trillions of dollars go through this system, trillions with a T. So it's huge. And the one thing that I think is really awesome on Azure, like I said, we've been on Azure for 3 years, but from a platform availability, what do we see at the OS and the database level in raw availability is almost 5 nines.
Wow.
As you know, Azure guarantees 4 nines with the availability zones. In reality, what we've seen is closer to 5 nines over the last 3 years.
Now, and you are in the zones, right? You're stretched across the zones.
Correct.
And I believe DR you have as well as a strategy.
Yeah, we have local high availability, and then we have DR. And I think one really good point is we exercise, our awesome basis team, we exercise that DR once a year to make sure it really works. We fail over, we run there for a day, we fail back. Unless you exercise it, I don't think it's really worth anything.
Practice. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Double check it's working, and also I think it's good that the basis people that are doing this failover, that they not only do it when it's really critical, when something is really going wrong, but they can practice basically and just confirm that the scripts are all in place, the books.
Maybe when we talk about my favorite topic, Holger is on application integration, I'm on availability, I remember you were mentioning in one of the really great sessions, Hans, I don't know if you are allowed to share the information, how much would cost the downtime of on Microsoft systems in a time where there is no special activities, and how much that would cost in a really critical, end year quarter closure. That was impressive as far as I remember. Yeah,
no, I think that's a great question. So a few years ago, we tried to determine that number with scientific accuracy, and it's totally impossible because depending on where you are in your business cycle, the cost could be phenomenally high. Like if Microsoft couldn't report to Wall Street because our system was down with a big unplanned downtime, the cost to Microsoft would be astronomical, right? Because there would be market impact, and it would make front page news. But on a typical day, roughly the cost we came up with was about $2 to $4 million per hour of unplanned downtime. if there's nothing normal, nothing special going on, right? I mean, if this would be during a quarter close, year-end close, during a new product launch, or other, during a major acquisition, obviously the cost would be much higher. And this is also direct employee impact. We're running payroll. I mean, SAP is our corporate backbone. We do use a lot of Dynamics, but the backend processes, that's on SAP, and people wouldn't get paid if SAP is down. So
yeah, I just want to ask how that reflect to my bonus. Just asking,
yeah, no SAP, no bonus. Sorry.
No, nothing, no vacations.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that the impact would be dramatic, and so we engineer for that. And you notice it's not 100% here. Well, because we do patching, and we have ways, and by doing what we call the rolling maintenance, where you take application servers out, you patch them, you reboot them if necessary, you put them back into your server pool. We do things like that, but for the databases, when you switch between primary and secondary, there's a very, very brief unavailability. So that's why we're not at 100%, but really close. Just full transparency, if you're looking at SAP availability, that is lower than these close to 5 nines, because when you do an enhancement pack upgrade or something like that, obviously you'll have SAP downtime, even if your OS and database platform are up.
Yeah, of course.
So, why did we go to Azure? Hey, it's about the dollars, right? So we have a very large infrastructure budget, and when you're on premise, you tend to oversize, and I'll go through that a little bit in more detail here, but multiple options to save costs in Azure. And I can tell you upfront, we saved anywhere from 10 to 15% with our first migration to Azure, and then subsequent refinement and optimization, roughly another 10-11%. So typically, I'm going to say 20 to 25%. Now that does go hand in hand with a culture change. We're all IT folks here. If you go in with the old bigger is better and get the most expensive and fastest server possible, if you go in with that mindset, you will not save any money. Actually, Azure might be more expensive for you than on-premise. So you want to be agile, you want to be lean, you want to tight size and be really close to the actual demand, because it's Azure. You can always go bigger. And I have another slide here in a moment. But so cost savings, huge reason for us to go to Azure. Agility, like I mentioned earlier, right? To make IT an enabler of new business programs and new projects instead of a blocker. Right? In the past, it was always, when can you have your SAP system ready? How long will it take you to procure the hardware? And we were the blocker in many cases. And these days, we're an enabler. We can create little sandbox systems or guinea pig systems within hours, and the business, instead of looking at fake PowerPoint slides with fake screenshots, they can get onto the system and play with real data. And it's such an enabler. And obviously the requirements coming back out of a session like this are 10 times better than people looking at PowerPoint mockups. So it really helps us to help the business. Reliability, I just mentioned, right? It's way better than what we had before. And then security, Azure makes it very easy. Lots of certifications, telemetry, lots of tools, least privileged access, just-in-time access, a lot of things. And obviously Microsoft takes security very, very seriously. It's job number one. And so we're super happy with running SAP, like our mission critical corporate backbone on Azure. There is another big aspect, and this is the first and best. Like we said in the beginning, we're not just talking about it, we're doing it. We want to be the first and best. And I think being the guinea pig, so to speak, sometimes, and working with the product groups allows us to feed, ideas and suggestions and improvements back into the product group. And it also makes sure that the product is super solid because we ran it. And, if there's any kind of bloody noses to be had, it was ours and not the customers. And so, I think that works. It's really been super beneficial. And, we have a long history of doing this, going back way early to the SQL Server releases. And that was a big motivation for us as well. And that's why it took a while for us to get there. But, 3 years ago, it was done. So cost. I think one of the things that's interesting, when you size servers on premise, your servers have a lifespan. Typically, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever either the depreciation or the warranty period of your asset is. And so when you buy a new database server, you size it. In a lot of cases, you size it slightly larger or substantially larger so that it is still usable 3 years from now, 4 years from now, and so on. But what this really means is, if you run your production system, you have a lot of waste. These extra capacity headroom that you don't need. And the business will never complain about this, because if your SLA is 2 hours for a batch job and it finishes in 1 hour, awesome. But if you're overfulfilling SLAs like that, it really means you're spending too much money. And when we moved to Azure, our basis team is super focused on cost optimization. They size things now maybe 3 months in advance. A new guinea pig or sandbox system, maybe even shorter. So the sizing horizon has decreased dramatically. And so as a result, the waste of these kind of, temporary over provisioning, that's much smaller. And that's where we saw a lot of savings, what we call the right sizing.
So that probably
yeah.
you need to change the way how you operate basically in the cloud.
Exactly.
In order to get those economical benefit versus on-premise, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's that culture change. Yeah.
Exactly. That's my question and my point, because I think most of the somehow customer complain, hey, this is SAP, this is more or less monolith, I cannot change it. And I think it's more problem on culture changes than SAP systems itself, because you need to think in a scalable way. So you need to change your culture. So agile way to really be able to recognize what you can optimize. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you look at SAP, it's surprisingly dynamic, right? You have these server groups, batch server groups, logon groups, like RFC groups, and you can add capacity with app servers, you can take it away. Obviously, wait until your users drain off and then take it away. You don't want to impact them. But there's a lot of flexibility. And I'll give you another example. So let's say you're doing, quarterly financial closes, and then of course year end is the big one. On premise, you would size for peak load, you would add a little safety buffer, and that's what you would run off. The whole year you would run at that peak capacity plus safety buffer. What our basis team does now is they size up and down with the demand. And Thanksgiving is a great example. That's a huge shopping weekend, lots of load on the system. They add a whole bunch of app servers into the system. They run at that higher capacity, and that's the kicker, and then they take them away again. And so your capacity afterwards goes down again, and that's how you save the money, because you don't waste all this overhead capacity.
Yeah. Exactly. And on premises, you are, as you mentioned, SAP is there flexible. You can add stuff and logon groups and so on, but basically you are stuck with the hardware that you have, and you need to order in advance to have it enough, and you need to be a little bit oversized because nobody wants to be blamed for the SLAs that you have a bad performance, right?
Right.
And so you have no choice, and every new hardware order takes time, and then you again you think in advance, you know. So you buy it, that upper left corner red one, it's huge, you know, for underutilized system. So this is really beautiful example of using the cloud here or the infrastructure to in a pay-as-you-go model. Yeah, just
and
to
Hans, when we are talking about this flexibility, so I mean, you started almost on the beginning of certification from SAP, all those HANA boxes and so on. So, and you start with all our first virtual machines. Now we have many other machines. Did you also use that opportunity to say, hey, this D series or E series before, now I have a new version, I would like to use new version because they have same CPU memory ratio, but they have more subs and I'm saving money? Are you also playing with that?
If it's possible, yes. Now keep in mind, we're internal IT, so we have some restrictions, you know. I mean, the goal is always to give things to the customers, and but you know, for example, we can't use reserve instances in IT. That's one of those things to drive culture change and to be very cost aware. But yeah, wherever possible, if we're seeing ways to increase capacity, save more money, we're looking at that. And I should say our awesome basis team is looking at that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
I'll give you a couple more information, a bit more information about our Azure migration strategy before I jump into some other operational aspects. So if you think about typical Azure migration strategy, it's what we call the horizontal strategy. And I'll jump to the next slide to kind of highlight this a bit better. So if you look at this is our SAP Landscape at the time of the migration. You have your you know, your SAP products as vertical columns, and then your SAP landscapes like Sandbox at the bottom, and your development and QA systems all the way to production at the top, right? And so that was kind of the way our systems looked. And we said, let's do a horizontal migration, just like, you know, everybody else. You start with the sandboxes, and you kind of work your way up the stack, right? And so you do that. But at the same time, we also wanted to accelerate some of the learnings in production. How do you patch a system and keep the downtime in the cloud very low? How do you do this kind of shrinking and growing a system? And you know, how do you know, that only becomes real if you do it in a production instance. And so we said, let's also do a vertical strategy where we decided, let's just move, you know, some systems dev all the way to prod. And I think we had 4, and just move them into Azure. Obviously, these were some kind of less critical systems. But this was a great idea because it accelerated learning, and you know, the team was very quickly to look at ways to automate it and script it. And so this kind of hybrid of the classic horizontal strategy with kind of some few cherry-picked verticals worked really, really well. And you know, in the end, by the time we moved our 3 big production systems, you know, like ERP, global trade, and supply chain, those were tightly integrated, so we kind of moved them as one migration group. By the time that happened in production, you know, it kind of was a non-event. And I'll show you the timeline here in a moment. But the whole migration took roughly a year. We did some early, you know, guinea pigs and some learning, but then the whole migration took about a year. And obviously, lots of lessons learned. I don't need to talk about bullet number 1. But you know, number 2 for us, that latency critical traffic from one SAP app to another, you know, those are the migration groups that I talked about. If you have systems that are very dependent on each other, especially if you have business processes that go over multiple SAP systems, you want to migrate those at the same time. Of course, same is true with upstream, downstream, legacy apps, or you know, other applications outside of SAP, so that as well. This bullet number 4, you know, with all these different Azure regions and just tons and tons of them coming online all the time. It's still critical, but it's becoming less difficult because you just have so many Azure regions now. I think that was back when we started, that was a little more challenging. Couple more I want to talk about. So this one, bullet number 6, I think is a great opportunity to save more money, because when you're on premise and you buy, let's say you buy a new storage array, well, that cost is sunk, right? You're now depreciated, but that capital expenditure that has hit the books, and there's maybe less discipline around keeping databases small and keeping, storage neat and clean. And when you're in the cloud, you pay for everything you use every minute. And so we did massive compression. You saw that earlier, right? 65 down to like 25 or 24. And also some archiving, right? If there's data that you don't need in the system anymore, that's past your legal retention period or things like that, really think about that opportunity to archive it or maybe even delete it, because then you don't pay for it. And keep in mind, whatever production data you delete, you will automatically, if you refresh your dev and test systems or your sandbox systems from production, you'll save it there as well. If you have a production local high availability with a separate database, you'll save it there, you'll save it on your DR side. So turns out if you delete it out of production, you're probably gonna ultimately delete it out of like maybe 6, 7, 8 other systems as well. And so there's some substantial savings. So I'll move on to the timeline here really quick. We did some experiments. Green is Azure. The shaded lines are the original plan. The solid lines are what actually happened. Blue is virtual on-premise, and red is physical on-premise. And you kind of see we're very slowly, wasn't really going anywhere. And then in February of 2017, we said, let's be serious. We had a lot of automation scripts done. We were confident the product was ready, and most important for us, the M-series SKUs were becoming available for our big databases. And you can see from here on out, it was 1 year straight up. And Microsoft's fiscal year runs from July to June. So this was our year-end close process. And we went live before year-end close. And yeah, it was solid. Really no issues whatsoever. We over-communicated with our business partners. We had very detailed, this is the plan for the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And then retro, what happened over the last 30 days, full transparency on good things, on bad things. Like I said, by the time we went live, it kind of was a non-issue or a non-event anymore because, people trusted us. And I think that's part of a critical migration. You just want to establish that trust and over-communicate.
I think you mentioned once, especially in the beginning, it was always only a side project. So if folks had time, they played with it and stuff like that. So it was just really a hobby or something.
And I'd say that's not recommended. Definitely, if you're a company thinking about doing this, please make it an official, fully funded project. And I have to say, our basis team, they're naturally very growth mindset, learning, curious. They wanted to own the infrastructure. That there was a lot of skill building involved, obviously. And now Azure has some great certifications now. I think what is it, the AZ120 and a bunch of other classes that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. But yeah, there's some great training now that makes it a lot easier.
Cool. Yeah.
So I skipped over I'll skip over a few slides here. So cost optimization. One other thing that we're doing is we're snoozing systems. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that we can only get pay-as-you-go systems. And that's intended to drive that culture change, right? To really push that. And if you look at these little snooze symbols here, these are all systems that are either snoozed on weekends or snoozed by default. Now you see here QA and dev systems are snoozed by default. So that means they're turned off. We don't pay for the infrastructure. Storage persists, but we don't pay for the servers. And so what happens if a developer wants to, be productive and do something? They have to go in and use a self-service app. And, in this self-service app, they can drill down into a system and then go ahead and start the system. System will come up, depending on what system it is. It may take a while, but go ahead, start it, and then be productive. And then after a while, and you can configure that, it turns itself back off again. And this is real. There it is. I hope Teams actually doesn't blend it out. Or if you want to go and check it out, the source code, it's open source. It's actually available on GitHub, and we'll put the link in the description. And this is, I think, a great example of how our awesome basis team developed something. They thought, hey, this is really valuable for other customers as well, and let's publish it and make it available for the public. And I think you'll see more things like that in the future as well. And then, of course, that saves money too, right? We're doing some other things. For example, for our disaster recovery site that kind of runs on a very small system. And so in case of a real disaster, the first step would be to upsize that. And, yes, you add a few minutes to your disaster recovery failover time, but we're still within SLA. But by running at a small system instead of that full load that you don't really need anyway, that full capacity, right? That's another way to save money. So lots of creative things. One quick thing about telemetry, since I mentioned that earlier, we're using Azure Monitor together with some monitoring out of SAP Solution Manager. And one of the things that we found super valuable is to take Azure Monitor data that kind of monitors the infrastructure layer and also some of the kind of the SAP foundational layers, anything internal from SAP, like, batch jobs or things like that. We're combining that with some of our web services monitoring that's at the web service layer, and then especially the Solution Manager business process monitoring, and it allows you to very easily correlate, SLAs or business process and business facing events with any kind of infrastructure events. And you can, from one, you can predict the other or the other way around. It allows you to do analytics, look at long-term trends. Are things slowly approaching SLA? Maybe we need to upsize something. Is there an incident? Or is there an incident about to happen that we can still prevent? And so there's a great white paper. Maybe we can link that in the description as well. Yeah. There's a great white paper where we go into more detail there. And then, of course, the other big story for us, HANA, right? That's a huge topic, and I think really the thinking, and this is where our great architecture team has done an awesome job. Initially, you saw this big ECC system that we have. The initial very, very ad hoc idea might be, hey, let's just take that and move it to S4. That certainly would work, but you would end up with this big monolithic system. Yes, we have an API layer around it because, like I said, we have quite a few of these API and BAPI, SAP Business API users. But even if you extract a lot of data out into data lake for some additional reporting, you end up with this big monolithic system. And the other thing is we have all these different business units that have different freeze periods. Like finance is very Wall Street oriented. Other business units, they have freeze periods when there's a new product release or things like that. So it's a bit like a sandbox with some children who are being asked to play nice with each other, and that doesn't always work. And to make that easier, we decided the best way would be to break things up where you have unique capabilities by system, you know, and gain more agility, and really use, you know, some of the new SAP products as well. And you saw we have an S4 system for master data, which will then master all the data in these other S4 systems, which is you have a single source of the truth, and it you know, provides a lot of clarity on who owns the data and where is the truth. With reporting, you know, we're using BW, and then ultimately the data gets funneled into an Azure data lake, and that's where you could also combine it with data from other systems and get a one-stop shop for everything. And then, and of course, you want to keep everything in sync. By having this kind of you know, more granular approach, we enable a lot of agility, and I think this is key for us. You know, like I said, we're rethinking some of our business processes, and you know, bringing business value where business can now act maybe a little bit more independently, still off the same master data source and the same, you know, reporting data, but in a more independent and more agile way. I think that's key.
Yeah, so if you patch or upgrade for logistic, okay, it will not hit other systems.
Right.
So yeah, okay.
Yeah, and the integration mechanisms, those are usually very, you know, different version friendly, right? So that will not break, and you're able to, for example, if you want to install anything additional, you can, you know, go on the system where you truly need it instead of impacting everybody else. And so I think it's a huge business enablement for us. Obviously, there's a balance. You don't want to go with 20 different systems. You don't want to go with just one. So I think each business, each company has to figure that out. But I think it's a good concept. Well, and okay, there's central finance. And then for us, you know, this is our current landscape, very similar to the other slide. Oops, I should probably update this. I'll show you how that's architected here. We talked about that earlier with the zones in our NetWeaver system. Same thing in Azure, in HANA on Azure. Again, you know, we have multiple zones. We have that local high availability, synchronous, and then that regional high availability that, you know, we do test once a year, and that's how we get to this you know, close to 5 nines. And yeah, lots of other things that the basis team is doing, and I think Holger, we talked about, we'll probably have some future presentations on that, and I think that'd be great.
Absolutely. And yeah, as you said, I think this is a fantastic foundation, a first step, and I think this is already so valuable for a lot of customers. And as you said, Microsoft IT is doing so much in different areas, and you're innovating in so different areas that there's so much content that we can get from you. So absolutely. We already talked about a few things, so I think maybe in February already, or even beyond that, obviously, maybe we can find some time for you to join, maybe also obviously with other colleagues if you want.
Absolutely.
And then we can dig in some other details. I think that would be really fantastic.
Yep.
I already have some topics, which other customers are asking, by the way. You know, they want to reference customer. They have, like, zones is the topic just now, you know. So as an example, so, you know, and which customers are using, you know. Okay, wow, Microsoft IT is using for itself betting, you know. That's why I ask those criticality of downtime, you know. So if we are doing and we are betting on Azure, I mean, we are fully allowed to ask others as well and give them the confidence, you know. By leading here, we lead by example. That's really the best way to do this stuff.
You're right.
And I think you mentioned that in your agenda, that I think it is a very big value because most of our documentation, reference architecture, best practices are coming from our experience from Microsoft IT and SAP landscapes. Yeah, and I think this is huge value for us, for quality of our documentation, and also for our partners and customers.
Yeah.
I mean, what I was always telling customers when I was still a CSA, I was really saying, well, look, Microsoft is running SAP on Azure. So we are basically providing the infrastructure. We are running SAP on Azure. And then if you look at SAP IT is also running at least some of their SAP systems really on Azure. And what I think is the most interesting thing here is that we're not doing this isolated, but there is a regular exchange where we share best practices with SAP, with Microsoft shares with SAP. And I think that's really something where we learn from each other, where we can, where we hear problems from each other, where we share best practices from each other. And obviously all these learnings from SAP, from Microsoft end up in the documentation that we share with customers and partners. Yep. So I think that's really unique. I honestly, I mean, if you look at others, we are really, really unique in there. And thanks to all the work that you are doing, Hans, this is also really promoted and customers learn from this. So I think this is extremely valuable.
Yeah, it's really a team effort. I do have to say the relationship between Microsoft IT and the product group, it's traditionally very, very good. Like you had Relitza here last week. She used to be in our SAP Basis team in IT. You know, obviously you had Jürgen Thomas here. He's married to one of our key principals in the Basis team.
So you have a back door there, right?
Yeah, back door.
It's a great
connections are there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
Good. Excellent. Well, perfect. Hans, thank you very much. I think we already took a lot of time from you, but I think this was really valuable, and I definitely think that we'll have you on the show again with other great informations.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for this.
Great.
And we'll see each other again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.